Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
Let's talk about protecting our partner's vulnerabilities. So one way I know, one sign that a partner is beginning to de-escalate and learning how to de-escalate their cycles is they move from a place where they exploit one another's vulnerabilities. And by that, I mean they push one another's buttons or flip triggers or poke at each other's wounds, to a place where they're actually protecting each other's vulnerabilities. And this is always a good sign when I see couples begin to make that shift to, well, I know that's a raw spot for my partner, and I'm not going to exploit that in any way or try to trigger that in my partner, because I care about them and I know they care about me. So it's a shifting of emotional energy. It is a shifting of expectations for one another. And it's always a great sign when I see couples begin to make that shift from, again, exploiting to protecting each other's vulnerabilities. And by exploiting, I don't mean that they are intentionally doing this. But what I mean is that the cycle tells them in moments where there's lots of energy and emotion coming up, the cycle tells them to push those buttons. The cycle tells them that's a good diversion, or this is a way I can make emotional contact and get my partner to respond, or this is a way I can shut down this argument, because I know if I push this button, it'll get a reaction, it'll hurt, and it'll stop this conflict. So when I say exploit, I don't mean that partners are intentionally trying to do that. What I mean is that ends up happening because the cycle has come to dominate the relationship in the couple. So when they begin to move from a place of exploiting vulnerabilities to a place of protecting vulnerabilities, it's a wonderful sign that they're beginning to really de-escalate and they're coming together against the negative cycles. So a vulnerability, as I've mentioned, is really just a wound that leaves a person open to being hurt or re-traumatized. It's a vulnerability is a feeling we get when we step out of our comfort zone and begin to take a risk emotionally to expose that wound to our partner. So a vulnerability is a wound, but if we embrace that wound and we speak from a place of that wound and we begin to expose that wound to our partner, that also makes us vulnerable. So I'm speaking about vulnerability in terms of a noun. It's a thing, it's a wound that was sustained, but it's also an action that we take when we expose that potential trauma or wound to somebody else. So it's an adjective as well. It kind of works as both, much like love is a noun as well as an adjective. It can be a feeling that I have, but it can also be an action that I take, and love can be behind both those things. So when we move out of our protection and expose ourselves emotionally in order to create a deep connection with our partner, by the way, vulnerability is really the only way we can create a deep connection with another person. There's really no other way that I've seen that works as well as being able to expose ourselves, open ourselves to the potential of being hurt, and having somebody else begin to respond with compassion and kindness and empathy when we are emotionally exposed like that. And so again, this is one reason why this is such a telltale sign that couples are beginning to move from a place of reactivity to a place of de-escalation in their relationship. And so when a couple or an individual moves out of that reactivity, they move out of a place of protection and they begin to expose themselves. This is a huge risk for that person. And I'm well aware that it's easy for me to sit here on this podcast and talk about protecting our partner's vulnerabilities if we're not seeing our partner's vulnerabilities. If what we're seeing on the outside is anger, frustration, blame, criticism, um, shutting down, withdrawing, those types of behaviors, it's really hard for us to think, oh, well, they're actually very vulnerable right now. And I get that. And so that's why we're always working in therapy between inside and out with couples. What are you feeling on the inside? What does it look like on the outside? What might that signal be that you're sending your partner? So when we move out of a place of protection and we expose ourselves to our partner, it's really, really important for our partner to be able to protect and respond to our vulnerabilities. And so, how do we actually go and respond to our partner's vulnerabilities? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can do that. First of all, is we have to understand what our partner's vulnerabilities are. We have to have a deep understanding of what they look like when they happen. We have to be able to put it in the context in the person's life. And so vulnerabilities can be a lot of things. Wounds can be sustained in a lot of different ways. Um, they're vulnerable to rejection, abandonment, feeling unvalued or not listened to. They might have a history of being manipulated when they were emotionally exposed, or they have their feelings turned around on them as well. When they were reaching for a parent or exposing themselves, the parent took those feelings and then somehow was able to turn that back on them and use it against them in some way. They might have had a former spouse who cheated on them and was not fully committed to them, or parents who favored one child over another. So these are all types of vulnerabilities and traumas that survivors can carry with them into their current relationship. So protecting your partner's vulnerabilities starts first and foremost with understanding them. And so when you've been with somebody long enough, when you begin to peel back the layers of their life and understand their experience, you need to have a deep appreciation for those wounds that they sustained. And again, it bears repeating, everybody's got wounds. We all come into relationships with some scars, whether it's full-blown trauma and PTSD, or whether they're deep hurts and things that we didn't get as children. These show up in our adult relationships. And so first and foremost, we want to understand what those vulnerabilities are. You might have an intuitive understanding of those, and I think that's great. Probably somewhere you have a feeling of it, but what I really want you to do is be able to articulate that vulnerability. You don't articulate it to your partner necessarily, but you need to be able to put it into words and understand it in context of your partner's life so that you really get it and can hear it and can put words to it yourself. So it might sound something like this. My partner is highly sensitive to being abandoned. As a child, neither of her parents were really there for her in crucial moments in her life. And as a result, she's felt like no one ever is going to truly show up and love her in those moments. At times, she feels like maybe she's too much for other people. And as a result, she protects herself by trying to cling and turn up the heat and push herself and push others into loving her the way she really needs to be loved. And I know in moments when we have conflict, when I begin to shut down, that leaves her susceptible to being re-traumatized in this way. It leaves her susceptible to being wounded again for fear of abandonment. So that might be kind of something you say to yourself about your partner. We could certainly reverse that and say, my husband is very vulnerable to fears of rejection. He felt often in his first marriage that he could never quite measure up, and that it was never good enough for his partner, and that no matter how hard he tried to please his partner, no matter how hard he tried to push his feelings aside and focus on his partner's, it never measured up. It never seemed to be good enough. So it's difficult for him to hear anything negative from me, even if I'm just sharing my feelings, because he often hears it as a sense of rejection. And I know this about him, and I understand that. And that's why when I try to voice a complaint or a problem, it often sends him far away from me, and I don't get to reach him, and he doesn't often respond to those feelings, because what he hears and what he filters is this sense of rejecting, that I'm not just having an issue or expressing my feelings, but rather somehow I'm rejecting him as a person. So I hope those are a couple of examples about how we can really articulate our partner's vulnerabilities and understand them at a deep level. So that is your first way of protecting your partner's vulnerabilities. It is to simply understand what their vulnerability is, and to be able to put that into context in their life, and to be able to put it into words that you could communicate that to yourself. The second step in this is really just being able to not play into your partner's vulnerabilities. By protecting them, we don't want to trigger them, essentially. So we don't want to go there. We don't want to expose their vulnerabilities when we're mad. No matter how angry we might get, we always want to be able to moderate our anger to a point where we never cross that line into exposing their vulnerabilities or triggering those or poking at those. We don't want to exploit it, as I've said, tease about it, make fun of it, or joke about it, even if we are getting along, even if we're in a good place. We don't want to make light of somebody's wound. And so that's a way of protecting our partner's vulnerabilities, is not to go there, not to expose it unnecessarily. We might wait for our partner to be able to expose that vulnerability, to be able to bring it up in a way that feels safe for them. And that leads us right into the third way, which is being able to make the relationship safe and secure enough that our partner can feel that they are safe to expose that vulnerability to you. And that means that you have to get yourself into a place where you can hear that. And that's difficult sometimes, especially in the middle of conflict with our partner. Oftentimes, when one or both partners have been triggered, it's very difficult for one partner to be able to regulate themselves, calm down enough, get back to baseline enough that they can be cognizant of the fact that a vulnerability has been triggered in their partner. So that's why it's so important to have timeouts at times. That's why it's so important to learn as a couple how to reduce those cycles, de-escalate them, so that we can get into a place where the emotion doesn't dominate, especially the negative emotion, doesn't dominate the relationship. And as a result, we end up inadvertently exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. This means that if your partner is shutting down, you don't push too hard to resolve the issues. You give them some space. It means that if your partner is attacking or criticizing you, that you respond to the emotion they are feeling behind the attack, and not to the attack itself, which is often fear that is exposing that. So I think about it a little bit like this. If your partner had a broken leg, would you expect your partner to get up and go run a marathon with you? Would you expect your partner to get up and go get themselves a drink of water, or go get themselves their dinner, or cook it for the whole family that night? Probably not. You would have a great deal of understanding and compassion for your partner, who very well may be laid up in bed with a broken leg. And if they did need to get up, you would stand next to them. You would put their arm over your shoulders. You would wrap your arm around their waist, and you would help them bear the weight of that hurt leg so they didn't hurt it even worse. And so when we're protecting our partner's vulnerabilities, this is a little bit of what we're doing. We recognize that our partner, and us too, to some degree, have a broken leg. Now, it's not a wound that we can see on the outside, which is what makes vulnerabilities so tricky, because they're hidden sometimes beneath layers of protection, but they're there. They're below the surface. And so we want to come alongside our partner and help them bear that weight when they are triggered in their vulnerabilities. And so we want to be able to wrap our arms around them and help walk them to a better place where they are not so wounded and so susceptible to being wounded as well. So protecting our partner's vulnerabilities means first knowing what those vulnerabilities are, being able to really articulate those areas of wounding and weakness in our partner. And by weakness, I don't mean that it's weak that we have a vulnerability. I just mean that it's sort of a chink in the armor. It's a susceptibility to being wounded. It means that we don't exploit those woundings and that pain in our partner, even in times of conflict. And it means that we actively reach out to protect them, come alongside them, and help carry them until they are healed or till they are much better. So I hope this helps in terms of being able to understand our partner's vulnerabilities, how they move from a place of protection to a place of vulnerability when they're exposing that. And in doing so, how we want to come alongside them and help them with it. And I'll say this to conclude, it's really important when I see both couples do this, and it's just amazing to watch this happen through our work on the couch with couples, where they will almost automatically move into this place where they protect each other's vulnerabilities together, or you'll see them preface it. Now, I'm going to say this, but I don't mean this as a criticism. And you'll see that acknowledge, oh, okay, no, I understand. Go ahead. It's all right. And so again, they preempt something that if they even get into an area that feels like they're going to be poking at an old wound, they want to preface their intentions for their partner. And in doing so, that's a way to protect. So couples that move from a place of volatility and reactivity to a place where they de-escalate, move from a place where they exploit their partner's vulnerabilities to a place where they protect their partner's vulnerabilities. I hope you found this helpful, and tune in next time. We've got lots more stuff for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.